So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Today, we're going to talk about analytical factors, demand sensing solution, what demand sensing is, and kind of why we developed it. With me is Adeline Soler, a senior demand planner at Helen of Troy, who's going to share her story about their challenges and what they've used the system for. But let's just jump on in. So let's talk a little bit about analytical factor. So who are we? I think, well, everyone on the phone, I think, knows us, so I won't spend too much time on it. We've been around for about a decade as an Oracle partner, a consulting firm. We are highly focused on demand planning analytics. We have a few individuals, including myself, who are part of original Demantra, pre-Oracle acquisition, with roles in development, consulting, project management, and product management. 6 years ago, I ended my tenure at Oracle as a director of product management in charge of Demantra and Demand Management Cloud. And yeah, and our focus is really around planning, demand planning, trade planning, and getting folks to make the most out of their Demantra and Demand Management Cloud implementations. So let's talk a little bit about some challenges that are very common to demand planning organizations. Things are hectic. Last 2 years have been even more hectic than usual, but even before that, there's increasing pressures on the planning teams to have shorter lead times for products, better availability, customer consolidation, meaning you're dealing with less but bigger customers who have a lot of sway on the business, and a stronger push for a constantly evolving and shifting product mix. And very frequently, getting high customer service, which folks like Walmart demand extremely high customer service, comes at the cost of high inventories, diminishing margins, and increasing costs. So it really comes down to, how do you improve your forecast? How do you do more with less? And how do you react to a rapidly changing marketplace? So demand sensing can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But when we talk about demand sensing, it's really about focusing on bringing in a variety of signals to get a better short-term forecast. What's short-term forecast? It depends. It could be a month out, it could be 4 months out, maybe 6 months out, but it's typically shorter than the common planning horizon for demand planning teams. That's usually 12, 18, 24 months out. This is more focused on a shorter term horizon that lets you bring in a variety of data to drive that forecast. How do we do that? We apply some advanced learning, pattern recognition, adaptive intelligence algorithms to identify trends and predictors for short-term demand. And I'll spend some more time talking about that. Demand sensing, unlike classic demand planning processes, could also run more frequently. You could run it every day, bring in additional data, new signals from the field, because you're focusing on that short-term demand. So let's say you were in media. Let's say you are a movie company and you release a movie on Tuesday. For folks out there who are wondering, why do movies and video games often get released on Tuesdays? It's because companies used to want to have a signal that told them how well things are selling, and if they need to do a emergency ramp up of supply for the big demand days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, they've got a signal to do it. So demand sensing also can take very, very short-term signals coming from the field and help you adjust the forecast. Something that classic statistical forecasting, one more data point isn't going to really change things. But what I'm trying to stress, though, is that demand sensing is positioned to augment statistical forecast, not replace it. A statistical forecast is actually, or a forecast is actually one of the inputs we take into the algorithm. And we don't say, well, you have a forecast, we're going to go and create our own standalone thing that doesn't even respect it or reflect it. If the forecast we see coming in from a demand planning tool is good, great. We're happy to say this looks good. But if there's other factors that contribute to the picture or the solution, then we want to incorporate those as well. So let's talk a little bit more about demand sensing versus statistical forecast. So if you look at the top graph, you'll see that we've got historical demand, classic noisy demand patterns, and then we get a statistical forecast, which could have a fairly long horizon. Demand sensing is focused on a shorter period, what we call a sensing period. That sensing period is leveraging a lot more signals to get a more refined forecast. Why do we focus on a shorter period? Because a lot of these signals that we want to leverage aren't really viable long range. For example, an excellent predictor of your customers' demand patterns could be open orders. For some accounts, it might be a week. For some accounts, it might be 2 months. But often enough, especially around critical periods like holidays, your customers give you orders well in advance. You get a good signal of what they want to do. And that could really improve your short-term forecast. Do open orders help you improve your forecast 9 months from now? Probably not, unless you're in very, very specific industries. Similar, your customers and your own current on-hand inventories could be signals of what their demand patterns are going to be like for the next few months, but they're not going to have any real impact of what the customer is going to order in 18 months. So statistical forecast definitely has its place. It's tried, it's true, it's accurate. From the current literature, machine learning algorithms for long-term, like long range, aren't any better than classic statistical forecasting. But for that tactical, short, mid-range forecast, that's where there's a lot of room for improvement. So let's talk a little bit about the sensing period and expected demand. So what is expected demand? Expected demand is Analytical Factor's demand sensing on projection of the future. I don't want to use the word forecast because it's not a statistical forecast. It's something a little different. And it takes a lot of different things into account. It takes into account trend of recent weeks, last year's demand, like are we up year over year? Are we down year over year? Seasonality, the point of sales demand for the last few weeks. We take the point of sales demand and we also use our own algorithm to generate a medium range point of sales forecast, open orders, on-hand information, and promotions. And we'll take all these factors and we'll use them as appropriate. Now, sometimes we'll use some factors, sometimes we'll use others. For example, I'm a huge proponent of open orders when they're good. So what demand sensing does, it'll actually look at historically, has an account's open orders been a good indication of what ends up shipping to that account or not? If it has, we'll determine how far into the future, like what sort of lag has it been good for? Is it good for 2 weeks out? Is it good for 6 weeks out? And that evaluation happens every cycle to say, all right, this account seems to have good relationship with open orders. We're going to believe they're open orders. So if we have an open order of 1,000 for a week from now, 0 for 2 weeks from now, and 2,000 for 3 weeks from now, we're going to believe that's what's going to happen, and we get a near perfect picture of demand. For other accounts, whether they don't have open orders very often, or they're very, very short term, or sometimes there's accounts that place big open orders, but they don't follow through with them. Those accounts, we're going to say we're not going to use open orders here. So the algorithm takes all this information together and generates a projection for the sensing period. So I'm going to transition really quickly. We have Adeline Soler on the line here, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Helen of Troy and how they've kind of adopted and are leveraging the demand sensing solution.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Adeline Soler, and I work with Helen of Troy. Helen of Troy is a $2 billion parent company, and our companies are segmented into divisions. We have the houseware division that is made up of Hydro Flask, OXO, and Osprey, a health and home division made up of Braun, Honeywell, Vicks, and Pure, and a beauty division that consists of Hot Tools and Dry Bar. So I am the senior demand planner for 2 out of the 3 houseware division, which is Hydro Flask and OXO. And I bet many of you know OXO and have it hopefully in your kitchen. We're known for kitchen gadgets such as can openers and vegetable peelers. And just to share more about the houseware division mission statement, our mission statement is making every day better. We're known for our thoughtful designs in food preparation, cooking, cleaning, organizations, and the other tasks to make everyday living better. Next slide, please. So for demand planning, we use the Mantra, which is an Oracle-based ERP system. Most of you probably have similar ERP system, which is based on historical shipments, as Nadal was speaking of. And my team, we like referring to this as looking in the rearview mirror. Actualized shipments is an essential data point as established, but it works well when business is steady. And what we have all experienced for the past 2 years with COVID is anything but steady. And there's still so much unknown of what's to come. With COVID, we experienced dramatic demand shifts from brick and mortar to our online vendors. We experienced demand shifts within our own portfolio assortment. And using OXO again as an example, we saw inflated demand in categories such as cleaning and baking. And we're still navigating through the constant demand shifts. But even pre-pandemic, our current forecasting system was not conducive for planning accounts such as Amazon, due to it being volatile for us, while keeping our high priority goal of customer service, giving the retailers what they need when they need it, and not having excess inventory. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the topic of demand sensing and the services that Analytical Factor is providing for my company. Some of the gaps in our current demand planning system is that we have demand signals living on other platforms that are not being utilized to shape our demand systemically, such as the retailer's point of sales data, their on-hand inventory, their targeted week supply, marketing calendars, and so on and so forth. My demand planners are actually manually merging all of this information on Excel in order to shape their demand. Next slide, please. So demand sensing was able to marry up all of these data points for us systemically and a touch of a button, enabling the demand planners to focus on the anomalies, enabling demand planners to have meaningful conversation with our cross-functional teams, such as sales and finance partners. And to give an example, one of the ways that we leverage demand sensing in our primary stages was as we were vetting the data that was being uploaded, one of our retailers' future open orders seemed extremely high compared to their POS performance. And it did not align with the parameters that they gave us as their targeted weeks of supply. So in turn, we were able to validate the data, meet with the sales managers, demonstrate what we were seeing, and we were able to address this risk. And in turn, this kind of compiling this data would have taken the demand planners hours, and it was instantly accessible to us. and it became part of our houseware executive S&OP meeting. So to sum up the story, the retailer adjusted their open orders. They actually canceled a couple of $1 million, but we were ahead of the risk and we were able to action on it immediately. And we were able to be a valuable partner to our retailer. We freed up inventory in a timely manner that was able to be consumed by our other retailers that did have a need. And please note that we can also do the inverse exercise where we can look at areas of opportunities where the account is not ordering enough inventory according to their POS trends. So this brings us, next slide, please. Thank you. So these are some of the available reports that the demand sensing tool has for us. Heat maps highlighting problem areas by category that duly function as exception-based planning for us. We're able to select the category and review the associated items and adjust the demand in demand sensing. The weeks of supply heat maps are the customers whose inventory is not aligning with their parameters that they've given us, their targeted weeks of supply. And it helps us to prioritize what needs to be reviewed with our cross-functional team, as mentioned before. And always KPIs, measuring the absolute error. And one of the immediate learnings that I had when we were setting up all of our accounts parameters with demand sensing was to validate what the account shared as their parameters versus what was actualizing. Next slide, please. So for those of you attending this, hopefully we all have the same business priorities, being customer service, always being on top priority as we continuously strive for excellence with our products and delivering on time. Optimization, utilizing all the available data that we have access in order to make informed business decisions. Evolution, to continue evolving with the market, not only for accounts such as Amazon, but for brick and mortars that stayed in the game during this pandemic with launching curbside pickup and 2-day shipping in order to stay relevant and meet their consumer demand. Responsive. I chose this word intentionally instead of reactive because there's so much unknown and what ifs that we are responding to our current realities. And lastly, optimal inventory, to always do our due diligence to protect the bottom line. So this concludes my presentation, but before I end, I definitely want to say thank you to the Analytical Factor team. Their partnership in getting Helen of Troy up and running and their continued support that they give us whenever we present a new challenge is invaluable. I seriously cannot praise enough what their entire team does for us. Thank you, Nadav.
Nada, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I've been speaking for like 30 seconds. So thank you very much, Adeline. That was a fantastic story. And it's always great to hear how solutions and products really support a business process. I figured let's just jump into the tool itself. Demo's worth 1,000 words. And I'm going to walk you through some of the key capabilities of demand sensing for the next 15 or so minutes. So we wanted to keep the user experience very simple. There's a lot of planning solutions out there that do lots of wonderful things, but one of the most common threads they share is complexity. And it's always a fine balance to strike between capability and complexity. The more capabilities you provide, the solution tends to get more complicated. The more complicated it gets, the higher chance of misuse or not using its full capabilities. So we want to focus on usability. What does that mean to us? So the first thing it means to us, it means we're trying to solve a specific set of business problems using very specific and targeted views. What does that mean? It means that the vast majority of work someone does in demand sensing is going to be done in less than a handful of screens. So this first screen, the exception screen, is where planners come in and at the level of work that they plan on doing, they are going to see some information that'll help them really focus on problems and address them. So here, for example, I've got item and customer group. And then the information I see at the top is kind of, we've got combinations. And as I navigate between combinations, I see details below. The details below can be viewed in month, quarter, or week. The details can also be toggled into a tabular view. I myself, I'm very visual when it comes to data and forecast, but I know a lot of people like seeing the numbers. And of course, as always, we want to support punch out to Excel. So both the top list of exceptions and challenges and the bottom can be punched out to Excel with a click of a button. So here I've got a bunch of combinations, but I really want to have a focused view of what I'm looking at. So there's a few ways to do that. Let's talk about what we're seeing. Excuse me. So we've got, for our sensing period, which happens to be between beginning of December to the beginning of April. So it's a 4-month period. We've got the forecast coming from the demand planning tool. The two planning tools we support natively are Demand Management Cloud and the Mantra. We're kind of planning tool agnostic, but that's where we built plumbing for. We've got expected demand, which you can see in this case is very different than the forecast. We should talk about that. We've got open orders, we've got a POS forecast, and additional fields. A field that we try to leverage as much as possible is also weeks of supply. How much inventory did we have here that we're trying to work with? So let's actually take a look at some examples. So in this specific example, I see that I've got a forecast that was 5,400. Someone's already gone in and modified it down to 4,000. We've got historical demand here in blue. We've got POS demand in teal. We've got the current forecast that's kind of continuing longer range. Why? Because it's a demand planning forecast. We've got a POS forecast based on the POS history, which is kind of capturing this level. It's not capturing a lot of seasonality because we don't have a ton of data. And then we've got this light blue line. Our light blue line here in the future is expected demand. That's what the system says we need to ship right now. So it's very different than the forecast. Right now here it's saying for the next couple of months, you should ship nothing. And then you're going to ship some. So the question is, why is it doing this? Why is it so different? So to illuminate that, I'm going to enable seeing on-hand inventory. Why do we typically keep on-hand disabled? Usually it's a very different scale of information. But here I see, even if I just look at the history, I'll toggle over to see, my history, my current on-hand is a lot higher than both what my shipments have been recently and my POS demand. So I have an inventory problem. Then I look at, let's turn that off for a second. Then I've got my POS forecast based on the recent levels we're seeing here. And I've got my forecast in red, which is higher than that. So demand sensing is saying, look, recently you've sold roughly 100, let's say call it 80 to 100 units a week. POS forecast is right around that level. The forecast you have from your demand planning system states more, and you have a lot of inventory. So our estimates are that your inventory is not going to go down with this forecast. It's actually going to go up. If you look at the projected on hand that is being generated here, it's going to be climbing and climbing for the foreseeable future. So what can you do about this? So there's a variety of tactics you could do. You could go in and adjust the forecast here for the whole sensing period. Let's say I want to make it 2,000. I can just click and have it be adjusted. I can go into the tabular view and modify specific cells. And once I've done that, I can also recalculate my assumptions and say, all right, I've made some assumptions. how is this impacting my on-hand situation? So it's gotten better. I still have a line that's increasing, but it's no longer nearly as bad. But instead of just entering a forecast, I could also say, let me accept the expected demand in the system. I can go match demand. So match demand, you'll see that the forecast now matches demand. We're expecting no shipments in the next couple of months, and then we're expecting shipments to resume. Now, what is this going to do to my on-hand inventory? Oh, sorry, I need to recalculate. And I can see my on-hand inventory is finally going to start dropping. It's still going to be pretty high, but I'm heading in the right direction. So by bringing in shipments, your demand planning forecast, POS forecast, on-hand inventory, the weeks of supply we currently have, the target weeks of supply for the account, we can actually take all that information and leverage and create a more accurate forecast that's more in line with what the customer is going to order. Dovetailing to that, to Adeline's Adeline's story as well, as working with Helen of Troy, we saw some very interesting things. For one account, for example, the account clearly stated, we want to carry 5 weeks of supply. And then we started looking at the data. We looked at the inventory of the customer kind of for the last half year. We looked at the POS sales, we looked at the shipments, and it became really, really clear. The customer says they want to have 5 weeks of supply, but their order patterns are clearly maintaining only 2 weeks of supply. So that was a really interesting insight that you can only see when you bring all this data together. Let's look at another combination. So you've got a bunch of ways to navigate. You can pick a customer group and just see the filtered products. You can also key in a part of the item code, for example. Let's go with 11193. And I've got a focused view here. Okay, so what are we seeing here? Here we're seeing actually expected demand be higher than the forecast. The forecast seems to be quite low, but the system here looked at what's happening both from an inventory position level. Right now, weeks of supply is very low. We're at less than a week of supply. We've got POS history and we have a POS forecast. And to get to a better place where we want to get to the target weeks of supply for target, here, demand sensing is saying, look, first week of history, customers probably going to want to place a larger order. After that, they're going to go stable for a while, and then they'll place another one, all just to try to maintain this kind of information. Let's look at one more example, and then we'll talk about additional capabilities. Let's clear this out. Let's go to...
Nadav, we've received a few different questions, but one specifically to what you showing on the screen right now. The question is about the on-hand amount. Is it on the customer or
it's the customer's inventory? It's the customer's on-hand amount. Okay. We've talked about bringing also the manufacturers on hand, but this is customer. Why? Customers on hand is a really, really strong indicator on whether or not they're going to place an order, especially if you have some insight to what sort of inventory they're trying to maintain. If they're low, there's a very high probability that next week or two they're going to put an order in. If they're really high, there's a really high probability they're going to put in no orders, or their orders are going to be quite small, even when compared to the past. So it is very much focused on the customers on hand. There's interesting things you could do with the manufacturers on hand, but that's not the case we're talking about here. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So Barnes & Noble, I'm looking at history, shipments are in blue. I've got my POS history, I've got a POS forecast, and I've got an interesting looking expected demand. It's actually quite spiky here. So I want to drill down further. Let's go take a look. So I go in to the table, I'll scroll down. I can see where my history end is. And here I can see that I had some open orders for the account. And the coloration tells me that the system actually took these open orders into consideration when generating the expected demand. So expected demand was probably based on POS, maybe baked in a little bit of your shipment forecast. But for these 4 periods, the system has ascertained, yes, Barnes & Noble does show strong patterns of putting good open orders 4 weeks out. So we're going to respect those. We might have open orders beyond that, but we don't believe those are reflective of shipping patterns. So the tool actually did some analysis and said, yes, we want to respect these open orders. And sometimes that's going to be scary. Like a forecast of 0, even at the week, could be sometimes troubling. But if that's what the signal to your customer is telling you, if a customer, let's say today's Thursday, if a customer has placed no orders for next week, there's a very, very high probability that they're not going to put an order in for next week. Like they still could. It's still forecasting. It's still projections. But there's high probability that if this customer typically places an order 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, and you haven't got an order for the next 2 weeks, no order is going to come in. So it's better to be actually brave and say, yeah, I believe no order is going to come in, and that's okay, instead of saying, yeah, maybe something's going to come in. You still have inventory, you still have safety stock, and there's a good chance you'll cover it. But if it's a matter of expediting manufacturer shipping to make sure some quantities at a warehouse, well, sometimes you just don't need it. A few other things I want to call out. So we've got this exception screen. Reconciliation is all about automation. So when an organization feels that there's specific scenarios that demand sensing does well or provides a lot of value, and they trust in it, they can say, here are the conditions that we want to drive reconciliation. And what will actually happen is the forecast of expected demand, the projection we talked about, is going to become the de facto forecast here. And every cycle, that forecast can automatically go into the demand planning solution. Here on the exceptions tab, it's more planner driven. They get to do the analysis, look at all the different data points, and only when they go in and adjust the forecast does it get queued up, and that's going to be sent to the demand planning system of their choice nightly. We've got reports that Lynn kindly enough showed. So here we've got 2 reports. So for folks who have never seen a heat map before, I'll spend 30 seconds on it. A heat map's a way of visualizing a lot of data pretty easily. You've got the boxes. The box size is typically a quantity. Here it happens to be a forecast. Here it happens to be on-hand demand. And the color indicates quality. So dark green happens to be good, and with red being bad, a little bit like a traffic light. So here I can easily say that where do I have the most exceptions? In books. It's not the biggest category, but I have a lot of exceptions. Here for weeks of supply, which categories have a lot of weeks of supply? Happens to be board games right now. We also believe in tracking accuracy. What we do here is we'll actually take different forecasts or projections and compare them side by side. So here we're taking the statistical forecast, the final forecast with user adjustments, and the expected demand forecast, and we'll actually measure their errors. And sometimes the expected demand does better, sometimes it does worse, especially with the longer lag you go. Expected demand might not be fantastic always, but it's really important to measure to understand how things are going. Finally, the last piece I'm going to touch on is collaboration. So we know that there's a need to actually track things, just like other planning systems. You want to go in and create notes. You want to also see audit trail. You want to see what's changed. So here you can actually see different changes made on different days. I made a bunch of changes today, and see what the initial value was, what the resulting value is. So there's audit capabilities, and you can certainly see who changed what when. But that's very, very important. There's more things to show, but I want to keep this brief. Shaul, were there any other open questions about the tool itself?
Yes, one question is what happens if you ship an item to various customers? Is this tool only useful if we are reviewing at the customer item level? Can it be used at the item level?
It could be used at the item level. I think the signal at the item level it's a different signal. You could use it at the item level, you could use it at the item org level. It's also, if you wanted to find an amalgam, you could say, I want to use this for my key accounts at the customer level and non-key accounts at this grouped level. Why? Because the signal it doesn't get muddier, it becomes different when you leave customers. When you leave customers, it'll become more of a question of what's my situation? How's my inventory doing? What's my total order numbers coming from the field? It's a slightly different question, but you could leverage the same screens with a slightly just different methodology to answer that question.
And one more, Nadav, about they don't have a POS and on-hand in Oracle Demand Management. Can they still use it?
Sure. So, and Helen of Troy also doesn't have all the facts that we're talking about in demand management. One of the strengths of this tool is we say we're going to actually leverage data that you don't have. Or for Helen of Troy's case, for example, they have a monthly demantra system. Well, month is great for long-range planning, but if you want to see kind of where the market's going very rapidly, you want more granular data. So we've actually brought in shipment data from one source, POS data from another source. So this doesn't have to get all the data from a single source. As long as you have the data, we'll work with you to harmonize it and bring it into a single repository. And this also stops a lot of the activity that folks typically do where they go, all right, I've got my planning system and I've got these other facts in an Excel and these other facts in this BI tool, and I'm gonna go hunt for all this information and then I can make a decision. A big part of the power of the solution here is in a single screen, you can bring in a lot of information. Some of it's going to be informational, some of it's going to drive the expected demand algorithm, but as much as possible, I think especially for sensing and reacting to demand, you want to bring all these signals together. So that's kind of the focus here. Any other questions, Shal, before I get to a few more slides? We probably have another
No, we'll keep the rest of it
5
to the
minutes
end.
of slides. Okay. So key, by the way, can you see my stop sharing screen and all that? Because it's on part of the slide. I want to make sure it's not bothering anyone. Okay, so I'll move it down here. I wonder how you hide it. Okay, so Gartner also talks a lot about demand sensing. Here are some things they said. You can improve your short-term forecast accuracy by 30 to 40%. And again, it really depends. I've seen scenarios both currently and in my 20 years in demand planning where you can get a very, very good signal from the field in specific instances. So sometimes it's near perfect information. If a customer says, next month I need 2,000 units, and it's a reliable customer, that's a great signal. They're probably going to order 2,000 units. So why try to forecast that? You have near perfect information. You can also reduce inventory by just having a more accurate forecast. Rough guidelines people say is for every % that your forecast accuracy is better, you can cut roughly 0.4 to 0.6% of safety stock. So if you get a more accurate forecast, you can definitely reduce safety stock and reduce inventory. By being more reactive to the market, you can increase customer service level, but not increase inventory. And really it's about sensing and responding to real-time market opportunities. You're launching a new product and you thought it was going to sell 50,000 units week 1. Well, it sold 80,000 units week 1. How long is it going to take you to react to that and do something about it? Or COVID happened, and this company had to close 2/3 of their stores. How long is it going to take you to react to that? Especially if if the company is carrying 600 of your SKUs, what are you going to do about it? So having something that takes near real-time information and lets you drive your short-term forecast is really, really critical. Okay. So a few words about some main approaches for demand sensing. Again, one of the main benefits is just reducing latency. You want to get the information you have available to you, get it as quickly as possible, and you're still going to have your forecasting cycle. But if you've got real insights coming from the field, you don't want to wait a month to revise your forecast. You want to have something that'll raise its hand and say, hey, based on current market conditions, there's a lot of flux coming in. You need to take a look at these combinations and apply some business intelligence and run these things down. Holistic data integration. So we want to serve as the central place where we bring a lot of information that may or may not be in your planning tools, maybe a more granular level that's in your planning tools. So that's very important here. Things like store count, inventory, and forecasts. If you've got a sales forecast and a customer forecast, you can bring those in, and the algorithm can be configured to take a look at these things and say, yes, if the sales forecast is well aligned with recent history and POS demand, then yeah, let's use POS forecasters to drive expected demand. If no, this is poor, we'll use something else. And something I didn't show in the demo, but something you could do very quickly is if you want to tweak things like a customer's weeks of supply. Well, like say Walmart is thinking about increasing their weeks of supply from 6 to 8. How is this going to impact Walmart as a whole, or for a given selection of items? I want to look at an item, increase the weeks of supply, and see what happens. The tool has recal capabilities where you can do this very quickly and easily. Same thing if they want to add a promotion in 4 months. What is that going to do to my demand based on how historical promotion is behaved? You can do that. Yeah, so we really developed this tool in order to focus on a very specific set of questions. What's happening in the world today, not 18 months ago? How are my demand signals behaving? And how can I incorporate all of them together into a better short to mid-range forecast? That's the focus here. We want to give a very, very light footprint from a usability perspective, make it really simple, really quick. Yes, you might not have fully configured slicing and dicing reports, but when someone goes in, they know exactly what to do, how to do it. With a matter of a few clicks, they've taken the action they need to do, and they can move on to more productive activities. Yeah. So in the, you know what, Cheryl, I'm going to wrap up in the respecting everyone's time because I want to get to the questions we have.
Okay. So I'll go to one question that just came from the chat window. We have a longer lead times on our items, most range from 105 to 160 days, and we are looking at 12 to 18 months. Will this still work for us?
So if the question is, what do I need to plan 10, 12 months from now, it might not be the best fit because you can still use the tool, but you're not going to be able to leverage some of the key elements that I think are very, very insightful for shorter term forecasting. Could this tool still give you a valid forecast 12 months from now? Yeah, but it's not going to be, I think, as accurate with a shorter horizon. But even if you can't, let's say, change what's coming from China or has been or OEM manufactured requested, you can still leverage a better short-term forecast for a variety of things. It can help you determine what your customers are going to do It's if you've got a big, let's say one of your accounts is behaving impolitely and they're putting some big orders in to ensure that they get a lion's share of your supply, even if they don't mean to, let's say, honor those orders down the road. Demand sensing can really help you with that. You can see what the order patterns have been, you can see what this account's inventory is, and you can say, I've got limited supplies, I gotta make choices. I know these orders are bogus, I'm gonna go somewhere else. It can help you identify trends in the market that you're going to have a challenge with your lead times, but it'll help you identify those patterns faster. Because if you've got 100, let's say 80-day lead time, if it takes you another 3 months to identify patterns, suddenly your lead time really is 270 days because it took you 90 days, you've already put your orders in, they're locked. So the faster you can get to insight of what's happening in the market, even if you've got a longer lead time, that information could be very, very valuable.
Okay. Next question. If we don't get a lot of customer data, what other data can be used that would be similar approach?
So other points of information could be, let's say, if you're not really customer facing, your own inventory situation could be very useful. You can bring in bookings data, because bookings data and shipment data can tell very, very different stories. So you can bring that in. You can bring in also whatever drives the business. If you think that you need to have promotions, or I've seen places where folks saw a strong correlation between a forecast and consumer sentiment. So whatever signal was really meaningful that you can bring in. Typically, folks talk about signals that come from customers, but if you've got your in-house signals that are useful, I think they could certainly be leveraged.
Okay, and which type of user should be using demand sensing?
So the classic use case is demand planners. Demand planners are going in and looking at the world. For companies who have, let's say, lightweight promotion planning, that's still something you want the folks who are going to be planning the promotions to go in. You can indicate a promotion is going to happen, see the impact. It's not a full suite of promotion planning, but they might get a feel for what's the customer's current inventory situation. And by virtue of being such a kind of light footprint, 2 or 3 screen solution, it might fit a sales team better than heavier planning solutions.
All right, that's all the questions that we got.
Okay, perfect. 5 minutes to go. I think that's always where I want to end. Yeah, so I want to thank everyone, especially Adeline, for joining us today and hearing what I had to say. If you have additional questions or follow-ups, just reach out to us, and would be very excited to continue the conversation.
Thank you all.